Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gershwin, and you are watching One Mind Syndicate. Today, we talk about the fall of Cadia. Now, just a disclaimer real quick, if you don't want the ending or anything of the fall of Cadia to be spoiled for you, do not watch this video. Stop right now. If you want to read this in full, go pick up the codex and read the lore there. We're probably going to do the full story at some point. Right now, we're just going to give you bits and pieces and, of course, the conclusion of the fall of Cadia. We're not giving you the entire thing. If you want that, you have to go out there and buy that codex. But again, guys, if you guys have any requests for future videos, please comment down below with a suggestion followed by whatever topic of Warhammer 40k you want us to create. We make lore videos every single day for all those that don't know. And then also, if you guys want to get a better understanding of all the characters involved in this awesome lore, please check out our 40 facts on Abaddon the Despoiler, on Saint Celestine, on Trazyn the Infinite, and on well, it would be Lord Castellan, so Creed, but we don't have a 40 facts video on Creed just yet. You could check out some Imperial Guard information. We have some cool stories on Creed there. But again, check out those specific characters' lore before you watch this one. It'll make more sense why everything is happening this way. With that said, hope you guys enjoyed this kind of spread out informative of the fall of Cadia. Let's get into 40 facts about the fall of Cadia. For 10,000 years, the bleak nether wastes of the Eye of Terror gnawed at the fabric of the galaxy, spewing their horrors into the Imperium of Man. And for every one of those 10,000 years, Cadia stood firm, an adamantium bastion given strength and purpose by the flesh, blood, and bone of the faithful. There are no records of how many valiant souls have fallen defending the fortress worlds of the Cadian Gate. But by their sacrifice, the tide of traitors, heretics, and demons is stemmed. By their example, 1,000 worlds have known what little peace can be sought in this bleakness of time. But as the darkness grows ever darker, and the blaze of the Astronomicon guttered like a wind-blown candle, the Eye of Terror pulses its baleful energies, spiraling outwards. Abaddon the Despoiler, heir to the cursed mantle of the Arch-Traitor Horus, at last unleashed the full might of the 13th Black Crusade. With the shriek that echoed through nightmares from Medusa to Ultramar, the Despoiler's fleet slipped its moorings. Eternal Vigilant Cadia, linchpin of the Imperial defenses, was the target. Cadia stood ready. Abaddon's campaign had been foreseen by the mystics and strategists alike, and the fortress of the gate prepared for its coming. The Leviathan warships of Imperial battle fleets prowled the icy currents of deep space, from the radiation-torn wastes of Prosana to the icy-ridged plains of the Solar Mantis. Bastions were expanded. Their already formidable garrisons of shock troops were reinforced by forces from across the Imperium. The splendored colors of knightly houses flew alongside the proud sigils of the Adeptus Astartes. The scuttling war engines of the Adeptus Mechanicus mustered alongside gleaming tanks of the Adeptus Sororitas, and everywhere the warriors of Cadia itself drilled and trained for this moment, and this moment alone awaited the battle that would define the galaxy for thousands of years to come. Millions perished in the opening assault, and millions more in the slaughter that followed. Warriors uncounted bled their last for scraps of worthless, ravaged ground. Graveyards of twisted wreckage twitched in the solar winds, marking the demise of fleets whose firepower could have unmade whole systems. There was no time for mourning, for despair. Cadia's defenders battled on until all strengths left them, and then went again in for the fight. For there was no respite from the onslaught. The first alarm came from the bell of St. Gerthal. For thousands upon thousands of years it had sat in silence upon its pedestal, content to while away eternally in the vast collection of artifacts possessed by Trazyn the Infinite. Then, on a day seemingly little different to any other in the unchanging hallways of Solomon's, the bell began chiming with ever greater force, in full and inexplicable defiance of the stasis vaults housing it. The first doleful note it chimed split the vault ceilings of the bell stasis chamber, unleashing a flood of coolant that instantly dissolved the last example of Ulikit's sand sculpture in existence. The second note triggered a logic cascade within the circuits of Solomon's master program, causing it to wrongly command each and every one of the Tomb World's warrior legion to return to stasis sleep. By the time the bell of St. Gersthal sounded its third time, the reverberations had grown sufficiently destructive that even the composition alloyed of Necron flesh could not withstand its onslaught. Trazyn lost 5 surrogate bodies in his increasingly desperate attempts to bring about silence. After the 13th chime, and just as the collateral damage finally outpaced Solomon's canoptic custodian's ability to contain it, the bell of the saint finally fell silent, pausing only to cast the contraption into the depths of the webway, where he profoundly hoped it would bedevil the Eldar as much as it had lately inconvenienced him. The Lord of Solomon's pondered the meaning of it all. Departing Solomon's, Trazyn made for Thanatos, crown world of the Orcuskar dynasty and home to the wonders of the celestial orrery. His welcome in those halls were less than effusive, in part due to the misunderstanding over the Orskar glyphs of dominance, which had gone missing during his prior visit. However, after bargains were struck and promises made, Trazyn was finally permitted access to the orrery itself. It was under the watchful gaze of the Orskar Lich Guard. As he stepped into the whirling spheres of living metal and holographic light, Trazyn realized something was amiss. The intricate webs that formed the links of the orrery were underlit by a crimson stain. It pulsed beneath the weaves of worlds like an infection forcing its way to the surface. Something was coming, something that would change the shape of the galaxy. Thus far it had gone unnoticed, but there was no hiding anything from the celestial orrery, for it was not merely a representation of the galaxy, but a perfect reflection of it. Trazyn realized that the Orskar had known about the rising corruption for centuries, perhaps even millennia. They could not, for inaction was the price of custodianship. But Trazyn had no such restraint. Indeed, he acknowledged no master except his own amusement. He could act if he chose. After untold millennia, there was some appeal in playing at selflessness. But where to begin? Where was the cause of the corruption? Trazyn lost track of time, studying the orrery's paths, searching for the wellspring of the galaxy's woes. The source of the blight worming its way through the galaxy's heart. At last he found it, far to the galaxy's northwest, bordering the Eye of Terror. In the orrery, the world was a catalog as a string of trinary data, whose details Trazyn deliberately forgot. To the Imperium, it was known as Cadia. Trazyn couldn't recall setting foot there, not in all his travels. To his understanding, it was a drab gray world of interest only to others. On the other hand, if the role of savior grew tiring, Cadia would surely offer opportunity to expand his collection. At last, slivers of data congealed in the mechanical recesses of Cawl's mind. The nodal grid was ready. A labor that might yet overshadow 10,000 years of lesser work was prepared. And yet the Archimagos suffered on onset of doubt. What if the Necron had lied? Crawl's delivering had once scratched the surface. There was still so much about the pylon's function that he could only guess at. As the last of the time-lost Ultramarines struck his dying blow, Cawl's priorities snapped back into focus. Logic dictated the unmistakable danger before his eyes, taking precedence over the unsubstantiated premonition. Offering one last prayer to the Omnissiah, Cawl sent the command. It began slowly, the resonant pulse of the pylons, slowly growing steadily in pitch and volume. Normally, this was unheard by all except warp sensitives. Louder it pulsed, the dull rumble consuming the roar of battle and across the Elysian field. Black lightning crackled along the pylon's flanks. Combatants from both sides collapsed, blood steaming from ears and noses. Psykers froze as their connection to the immaterium faded, their conscious minds dragged into oblivion. Black lightning leapt from the pylon's pinnacles, not just from those upon the Elysian field, but every functioning pylon yet on Cadia. The beams converged in the upper atmosphere, the outer edge brushing Phalanx's golden flank. A battle fortress engine flared in evasive actions. The monolithic beam seared across the stars, a sable lance aimed to the heart of the Eye of Terror. Slowly, the shift, too small for even the most sensitive of instruments to tally, the Ocularis Terribilis began to shrink. Though none in the nodal caverns knew the scope of Cawl's undertaking, its effects were immediate and pronounced. Abaddon's host of demons, their hold on reality already made fickle by the pylon's formerly dormant state, slipped further into the abyss that spawned them. Demon-fused traitors bellowed their last as their cursed halves were torn into the void. Possessed war engines fell silent. Greyfax screamed wordlessly as the immaterium purging grasp of the pylons clawed at her mind. Righteous anger, her anger on reality's shores, she clung, so strong, refusing to yield. Even Abaddon staggered under the assault, but the despoiler had ever stood as much apart from his dark patron as at their side, and he endured the fading of their blessing with snarling fortitude. Others were not so fortunate. The Legion of the Damned, their presence in the mortal world was inconstant, blinking out like wind-guttered candles, their flames stuffed by the pylon's power. Even Celestine, the manifestation of the Emperor's will, grew dim. The golden light faded, and with it the hope of mankind. Faith, the same faith that had once sustained Cadia's defense in those darkest of hours, began to recede. Valor faded alongside, not just from within the ranks of Creed's swollen regiment, but also among the Capic Eagles and the Vostraians so recently set loose by Trazyn's prison. As for the Black Legion, they cared not that their demon host were swept away, and the remainder weakened. They saw only the physical proof of their ancient belief. The false Emperor's light was fading, and took new strength from the sight. The battle for Nodal Cavern shifted, its pace quickening. Orvin Highfell died amongst his snarling brethren, gauntlets locked about a bloodthirster's throat even as the beast tore him apart. Wolfins avenged him, ripping the demon asunder with fangs and claws, but one by one they too succumbed to their wounds. The wake of dead and dying traitors, one last offering to the Allfather. Creed stood firm, the Eighth with him. Their example spread to the stern men of Vorstraia. The Capic Eagles, determined that the scions of the Schola Progenium would not be outdone by mere guardsmen, found their courage in their pride. Through it all, the duel of ideologies wore on, the Despoiler on one side and the Living Saint and her Gemini Superior upon the other. What had begun as an equal battle now favored Abaddon. Before the Dark Gods had blessed him, he had stood amongst the greatest of the Adeptus Astartes, seldom bested in battle. Blessed of the Emperor's light, Celestine was a mortal shell, reborn too many times from the tides of the Immaterium. Her handmaidens were extensions of her faded light, weakened by the Immaterium's recession. Though their resolve didn't waver, the outcome was never in doubt. Eleanor spiraled out of the duel, blood oozing from her lips. Black guard closed around Genevieve, a wall of Terminator armor and roaring chain blades that even her blessed sword could not pierce. Again and again, the ardent blade clashed with Drac 9, but Celestine's efforts were now given over solely to her own defense, and even this desperate parries grew weaker with every stroke. At last, the backhand blow cast Celestine to her knees. Creed saw the Living Saint fall, and knew at once that her death would mark the end of all they had striven for. Bellowing orders, he threw the Eighth forward in one last desperate charge. Drac 9 slashed down. Celestine screamed and convulsed As Abaddon raised the demon blade for a second strike, the living saint clambered unsteadily to her feet, one hand clamped over a bloody gash in her armor side, but her gaze unfaltering. In space above, navigators lost their bearings. The Cadian Gate, a legend of becalmed warp tides since the earliest days of the Imperium, grew motionless as a frozen millpond. The layered void shields of phalanx collapsed to nothing as their connection to the immaterium faded. Teleport relays flickered, their transit corridors diffusing as the warp receded. From phalanx stratagems, Commodore Trouveau took in rushes of reports and wondered what it all meant. Ahead, beyond the jet-black utterances of Cadian's pylons, Chaos cruisers broke cover from amongst the Will of Eternity's debris field and drove hard to the safety of the Black Fleet's big guns. As recon Thunderhawks burned towards the Blackstone's grave, Trouveau kept a suspicious eye fixed on the Auspect hologrid. His instinct screamed of imminent danger, but his conscious mind saw none. Unprepared to embrace one over the other, Trouveau watched and waited for new data. Abaddon stood like a rock jutting in a river of flesh and bone, Draknane carving a bloody swath with every strike. The despoiler and the wounded saint became the battle's focus. Every soul within the nodal chamber, living or damned, knew that victory or defeat turned upon the fate of those champions. The Terminators of the Black Legion regained their master's side, only to come under renewed fire from hotshot lasguns. The Vestroyans 21st were torn apart by a countercharge of power-armored Chosen. The stalemate ground on a battle bloody enough to whet Khorne's appetite, had only the Lord of Battle been able to peer through the growing dead zone of the Cadian pylon field. Slowly, the fate of the northern flank turned, the Black Legion driven from the beleaguered Capic Eagles by a mass fire of Cawl's maniple. Seizing the opportunity, Greyfax rejoined the embattled shock troopers, her every barked order lanced with unambiguous threats. More afraid of the grim Inquisitor than the guns of the Black Legion, the Eagles advanced. Taking command of the Khazarkan platoon, Creed led another charge across the bloody ground. The Lord Castellan had no doubt about his ability to match Abaddon's might for might, but the Astra Militarum's way had ever been to overcome with numbers that which could not be bested through skill. Trazyn the Infinite watched the battle from a rocky perch, aware of the history unfolded before him. His taste for glory had faded, replaced by the urge to claim a trinket from the monumental hour. Perhaps a thief is all he was meant to be. Metal fingers toyed with a tesseract labyrinth, its unfathomable dimensions fit to carry a single trophy from the embattled Cadia. But what should the trophy be? So many prizes worthy of presentation clamored for attention. A stray blast shuttered Trazyn's stalagmite, and he retired to a safer ground. The tesseract would wait, whatever his prize. Its historical value would only increase as the course of the victory tipped one way or the other. Creed sighted along his pistol and sent a las burst through a Chaos Terminator's cracked eyepiece. Before him, a gout of warp-tainted promethium immolated a file of Khazarkan. A dark shape loomed through the flames, eyes burning like coal. The Talon of Horus roared, snatching the rest of Creed's escort into oblivion. Abaddon lurched away from Celestine, her blade ripping free of his flesh. It had been millennia since he had last been hurt like this, and his spirit boiled with the need for revenge. But as the Cadian 8th surged to reclaim their beloved general, Abaddon realized he had no time for the luxury of pride. The last vestige of the warp was retreating before the pylon's arcane energies. If he were to depart, he would have to do it now. Reluctantly, his eyes never leaving Celestine, Abaddon gave the order to withdraw. As the vengeful spirit's teleporter anchors engaged, the honorable warrior Abaddon had once been acknowledged. The feat of Cadia's defenders had managed. They had lost, though they did not yet know it, but they had also won. He had sought to break Cadia's spirit, send the vanquished souls of his garrison screaming into the warp. He had not done so. For the defenders, azure lightning crackled across the nodal cavern, and the surviving warriors of the Black Legion faced into nothingness. Creed pulled angrily away from the medic attempting to treat his hand, blinking away after images as the implications hammered home. I set this world's fate in motion before I even made planetfall, Abaddon had said. The Lord Castellan wished he could believe the words were mere bravado, but his heavy heart knew otherwise. Following the sudden secession, Archmagel's Call's first thought was to recheck the nodal grid's function. Finding it satisfactory, he secured from war mode and took inventory of his remaining forces. Greyfax shook with the effort of keeping her soul centered as the warp vacuum sought to reclaim it. Trazyn slipped the Tesseract Labyrinth beneath his cloak, and regretfully allowed that Abaddon would not grace his collection, at least not now. As for Celestine, the living saint stared upwards through the ruined cavern roof and into the starlight skies beyond. Her manner, that of one who had already knew what would happen next. On the surface, the Thunderhawks of the Crimson Slaughter and warped dropships of the traitor legions braved the Defenders' fire, retrieving whatever Dark Brothers and demon engines they could. The cultists and heretic citizens, never more than fodder to wary Cadian's guns, were abandoned to their fate. Tor Garradon rallied what remained of the Imperial Fist. Scarce a score of battle brothers from the Third Company still fought, some through horrendous wounds. Of the first, only Sergeant Furon remained. Garradon was struck by the irony. The third had only been on phalanx because they had been considered too inexperienced to join the chapter's crusade of vengeance. Those who remained had nothing more to prove, assuming they survived what was to come next. By contrast, Marshal Amric's Black Templars harried the retreating traitors, slaughtering the crew of one dropship before they could take flight, and bringing another two down with missiles. Cadia had fallen. And those were 40 facts about the fall of Cadia. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it made sense to you guys. It was sporadic on purpose. We can't give you everything all at once. I think that would be kind of cheating all the people that bought the codex and wanted to learn the lore. We will create a full comprehensive lore in the future. We just got to let some time pass by. In the meantime, please make suggestions as to what type of topics for Warhammer 40K you guys would like us to cover. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And we also have a Patreon channel. If you're willing to support us, it's a simple $1 a month. And for that $1, you get 2 lore videos every single day on YouTube, and then you also get some extra stuff on Patreon. So please help us out. And of course, guys, thank you so much for liking, commenting, and sharing. We're almost to 50,000 subscribers, and we're almost to an awesome giveaway. With that said, this was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.